Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing another new fantasy releases wrap up, and the 3 books we'll be discussing would be Engines of War, The Scorpion and the Night Blossom, as well as Soulgazer. As always, there will be timestamps down below in case you'd like to skip ahead to any one specific book or reference back to them at a future date, as well as links to these in case you're interested in checking them out for yourself. But jumping straight into it, I'm going to kick it off with Engines of War because it is the one that I am the most excited to talk about. This is the 3rd and final installment in the Age of Uprising series, so obviously I can't give away too many of the specific details about this 3rd book, but I am going to kind of talk about the trilogy as a whole as opposed to just giving you a synopsis of the 1st book. I have talked about it many a time, so you might have heard about the general idea and setup of this. You follow the Hawksburg Guild. It is a somewhat steampunk epic fantasy world, which I think is incredible, and the idea is that you have the Hawksburg Guild having a lot of power, as do a lot of the guilds. And there is somewhat of a house war setup. The guilds, they do work together, specifically often to maintain their grasp on power, but they also have their own squabbles amongst themselves. And this kind of blinds them to the fact that there are a lot of other things that are going to prove to be threats to them, including some individuals within some religious institutions, as well as the general population who is tired of the grasp that the guilds have on them. And you follow the matriarch of the Hawksburg Guild as well as her 3 children. These are all adult characters, though, just to be clear. And you do have a mysterious 5th perspective that pops up in the 1st book, and it kind of reshapes your view of a lot of the events that you've thought you understood up until that point. And then within the 2nd book, you actually branch out and you get a lot more of the perspectives with the other guilds, as well as some insight into what's going on with some of the other threats within the story. And then in the 3rd book, everything comes to a head. I actually feel like the 2nd book, between the 1st and the 2nd, I already felt like the 2nd book was an improvement upon the 1st because I really liked getting to see how things branched out and getting more than just the Hawksburg Guild. And then in the 3rd book, you're kind of seeing how all these people are adversaries and how oftentimes the general population gets left behind anyway. And I liked that this wasn't a matter of old versus new in a simplistic form. It wasn't like you were saying we have to move forward with the steampunk elements. This is where it comes into the picture with things like the progress of technology and how magic is somewhat intertwined with that versus the old ways, which is where you see the religious institutions and their claim on power, and they appeal to the general population because they're kind of presenting them with this false sense of let's go back to when we were all equal before the guilds held all the power. But they're not really after equality, they're after their own kind of power anyway. And I liked that while you do have this clash of old and new, it was not particularly simplistic, and it wasn't trying to present one as better than the other. And I think this is especially true in the 3rd installment because the 3rd installment was showing how even though you probably will choose a side as a reader, none of the sides are good, and so there's a lot of gray morality within this story. I think that what the 2nd book and parts of the 1st did really well is it illuminated these facts for various different perspectives. You have some characters that are realizing that maybe the things that they've been upholding, the institutions that they've been upholding this whole time, are really not what they thought they were, while also being faced with some very deadly and dangerous old magic as well. And then within the 2nd book, you get that, but then also with the expansion of the perspectives, you're seeing what happens when characters do want to hold to certain ideals and that the ways that they have to challenge that or choose not to. And then in the 3rd one, you see all these differing views clash. You also see people stabbing each other in the back. You're seeing people have to work together that were previously enemies. You're seeing people that weren't previously enemies now maybe are on opposing sides. There's also really great battles within this. It reminds me a little bit, just a tiny bit, of within the Age of Madness series, when you have that general idea of you're watching those in power try to attain it or maintain it, and they are for innovation and they are for progress, but really only for the ways in which it can benefit them, and they're still going to exploit the general population. And how you watch that idea of nothing really changes. Sure, society looks different, but the people in power stay in power, that kind of bleak view that you get within that series. I think there was pieces of that within this as well. I, in general, thought that this series was fantastic. I do want to give a heads up if you check out this trilogy. While it is a trilogy, and this is the third book in the trilogy, it doesn't really conclude every plotline. So my guess is that we are going to see more within this world. Maybe there will be a continuation series. And I understand why it is the way it is, but I think maybe it's best to know going in that everything's not going to wrap up neatly. There are certain things that it feels like it's going to bleed into something else. But I still found the conclusion satisfying in that it felt like the main arcs and the main themes that were present within this trilogy, it felt like those had satisfying conclusions, even if certain plot lines were left kind of up in the air. And I'm excited, though, because when I was reading the second book in this series, I kept thinking, there's no way we're going to have one more book and then call it a day, because we've had a lot of things introduced to us, and a lot of things that are really out there and wild. I've mentioned before, for those of you that have watched Game of Thrones, some of the ways that magic enters the picture, and everybody is really astounded by what it can do because they thought they understood magic, but then this other individual comes into the picture and just does something, and it's not really explained. It's not necessarily a magic system, necessarily. There are pieces of that within this series. So things like that where you're thinking, okay, well, that country obviously utilizes this, or it seems like maybe there are beings outside of their realm that might be trying to influence things, but you don't get all of that, so then you're left questioning, are we going to do something with this here? I feel like we have to, and it plays a role in the events here, but it has that feeling of there being a threat on the outside, slightly manipulating things, and I'm excited because I think we are going to maybe get more of that in a future series. I don't know how it's going to be structured because we have no news as of yet, meaning I don't know if we're going to get a lot of the same perspectives, or if we're going to get completely different characters, and then maybe some of the characters from this original series will pop up. Maybe they'll be referenced. I don't really know. I don't care. I'm just excited for whatever comes out next. I do think that if you give this series a try, the first book has a couple of things about it that didn't really necessarily bother me, but I could see it being like a little frustrating for some readers. One of the things being, as I stated, these are not the most likable of perspectives to follow. And also, because in the first book, you're primarily following members of the Hawksburg Guild, they're a little oblivious to the ways in which their guild is exploiting people, and they have their eyes opened. And I don't know that that's the most unfamiliar terrain for a lot of fantasy books, and I know sometimes, even though we like following, especially in epic fantasy, we like watching people in power, and we like political intrigue, and we like court politics. Even though that's all true, sometimes it can be irritating to watch characters that have the power and then have to be told this lesson that is pretty obvious, like, oh, yeah, you maintained that power off the backs of other people. I feel like power is the key word for today. But I can see that being a little frustrating, and the ways, though, that they discover it, that's where I feel like the uniqueness comes into the picture, how their eyes are opened. It becomes very deadly, very cutthroat, and very intense. But I think the thematic elements are the strongest. Personally, I think they were really strong in this third book. And there were some really great quotes in this. I really liked this series. I really think that the first book, while I liked the first book when I read it, I don't even want to call it the weakest. I just think it gets expanded upon within the second and third books in ways that are really exceptional. And if you're somebody who's been craving epic fantasy, especially epic fantasy that's not just kind of your traditional, there's some kind of orc-like figure, there's some big bad antagonist, Dark Lord type character. If you like the idea of epic fantasy but want something a little bit different, I think that this one's going to fulfill this. I always say, if you're a fan of audiobooks, they have different narrators for every single perspective, and that continues throughout the series. So even as perspectives expand, you get additional narrators, and I think that the narrators did an amazing job. Really love this series. Think it's fantastic. I want more people to read it. Next up, we have the book Soulgazer, and I wanted to start with Engines of War because I do think that that's an underhyped series, first off. I think epic fantasy is not as on trend currently, and I wanted to juxtapose that against Soulgazer, which I do think is fulfilling a lot of what we see so often, and I do think it kind of shows, one, what fantasy can do / fantasy romance, because I do think fantasy romance is its own genre now, but I know not everybody considers it separate. But I do think that these two stories represent just how different fantasy can be, and also that it can appeal to different people, and there are different kinds of stories for everyone within fantasy. Soulgazer ultimately didn't necessarily work for me because I am open to fantasy romance. I always give it a try, Romantasy as well, but I am wired more toward the epic side of things. But I do think Soulgazer is going to work for a lot of people who do enjoy fantasy, romance, and Romantasy. The setup for this story is you follow this young woman who, most of her life, she has not really been able to have any sense of freedom or agency. She doesn't have really any say over her own life. And this is in part because of the restrictions that her family has placed upon her. They view her as very dangerous based off of some things that they've been told about her. But additionally, you do recognize pretty early on that she seems to carry a lot of guilt over something that happened with a family member. She blames herself for this inciting incident that you don't really know all that much about. But you know that she isn't just forced into her seclusion. She also has somewhat placed it upon herself due to this guilt. And trying to rewire her mindset is something that you explore over the course of the story, recognizing that, yes, this tragedy fell upon you, but you're not solely responsible, and the things that have been done in response are not fair. And I do think that the story takes a lot of time for this character to start to unravel these things. It's not just this instant like, oh yeah, okay, I am going to be a girl boss now. It's not that kind of a setup where she just realizes I've been wronged. I do think it takes the time to explore. It can be a little aggravating for the reader because you can see very clearly that that's not fair and what's transpired is not something that she should be held totally accountable for. But I do appreciate that even if it is obvious to us that the author took the time to ensure that this was given its respects, because I think that in something like that, it is necessary to do that for the strength of the character development. That said, when the story first starts, it has this very almost out of touch writing. Everything feels very ethereal. I've described it in the past, and it's somewhat disorienting. Our character is just sort of walking around as people are engaging in this interesting almost celebration, and she decides finally to just make a decision for herself, and she ends up deciding, I don't want to be forced into this marriage that I'm supposed to be forced into to this very cruel man. My father has plans because this person is very significant and important, and in order to try and maintain a relationship with this individual, that is why he's marrying me off. But I don't want this for myself. And so she has this little spark, and she decides that she's going to escape this fate for herself. She doesn't really know all the details. She just knows she doesn't want this. And in order to pursue this escape plan, she ends up going up to this person who is this somewhat rakish pirate type character who is known for going on these adventures and being somewhat heroic, and she tries to appeal to that heroic side, but he, of course, doesn't want to do anything without recognizing that he deserves something in return, and through basically shenanigans, they decide that they are going to marry, and then he is going to sweep her off her feet and rescue her. That's kind of the illusion that they're presenting to both her father and the person she was supposed to be married off to. And he knows full well that this is going to bring the wrath of her father and this other individual she was supposed to be married to. But he also thinks that the same type of almost prophecies that led to her family thinking she needs to be in seclusion, he thinks he can utilize these things for himself to try and discover something that he's been searching for pretty much his entire life. So most of the story is actually a seafaring adventure. The very beginning, I was really actually engrossed in the writing style, and I felt like it had this more serious and interesting way of telling the story. The prose itself was, I thought, really engaging, but then it did kind of settle into something more standard. And I did feel like once they were on the ship, the kind of forced proximity and this forced arranged kind of marriage, it wasn't really arranged, it was sudden, but this marriage of convenience, I guess we'll call it, it kind of ended up resulting in a lot of things that I felt like were relatively familiar to us, especially within the fantasy romance genre. But I do think that it had a fun adventure feel to it. Again, it didn't necessarily work for me, but I do think that it takes a lot of the tropes that are popular and on trend and that a lot of people really like, takes a lot of those things and it combines it with what I described before, which is, I think, some good character development and introspection for this character. So I appreciated those things. I don't plan to continue on with the series, though, just because it ultimately isn't my cup of tea, but I can see this working for a lot of other people. Last for today, we have the Scorpion and the Night Blossom. And within this story, you follow a young woman named Anying, who is doing everything in her power to protect her family after they were attacked by demons, which left the father dead. Her mother is no longer really even able to function alone. She's essentially in somewhat of a coma. And then her little sister, for a long time, has been so young that she's not really been able to contribute all that much with the care of the family. So our main character, Anying, has been caring for them herself, and the demons seem to be having more of a grasp on their society. And as such, our character is recognizing, I only have so much time before the demons come after us, and my mother only has so much time. I need to take matters into my own hands and do something. So she decides to enter into something known as the immortality trials, which is where the immortals, who seem very sort of flippant and like they don't actually care that much about humans, and that they more so see them as entertainment, they have these trials, and whoever wins gets this pill that can grant somebody immense amounts of power, and our character wants to use this to try and save her mother. She sees this as the only means of doing so, and the trials are going to be very deadly, but she decides it doesn't matter. It's try to do this now and maybe survive, or die in 6 months guaranteed. That's kind of her mindset. And thus she goes on this journey, and along the way she encounters another individual named Yu Chen, who seems very, very capable, overly capable to a point of suspicion. And this character is helping her for reasons she doesn't really understand, but she figures, I'll take all the help I can get, until she discovers something about this character that makes it so that she wants nothing to do with them and sees them as an adversary beyond just the point of being another contender within the trials. But the two just kind of can't keep out of each other's orbit. And within this all, there's also kind of mysteries involving her father and some clues he left behind that she has not really been able to disentangle, but she knows that there's something that her father wanted her to know, and she's wondering if she's going to find it as she is engaging in the immortality trials. For me, my favorite parts of the book were all the parts that had to do with Anying and her family, because I'm always kind of a sucker for those sorts of things. I also appreciated that we even got that. I think that's a huge thing that not only makes sense for characters to be motivated by, but also for us as readers to relate to, because so many of us do have people in our lives that we care about. And when you see characters that will do anything for their family, I think it kind of immediately endears us to them. I will say, for quite a while, I was feeling pretty lukewarm about this one because it had all the typical trappings of the things I don't love in romantasy and fantasy romance, which would be things like the mysterious bad boy type character, and he has his little nicknames for her, and a lot of those things that were like, oh, not this again, you know, or at least that's how I feel, because I know for some people they eat that up and they love it, and that's great if you love that. But for me, I've just kind of seen it so much, and I'm like, I don't always like this. But I will say, for quite a while, the book is going in this direction of feeling relatively similar to a lot of what we've gotten before, and I can't say too much, but I do feel like in presenting things as been there, done that for a while, it does make some of the things that happen later have more impact, because I think it kind of pulls you in with this false sense of, oh, I've seen this before, and then you sort of let your guard down, and then other things will happen. You'll be like, hey, I didn't necessarily see that coming. That was I liked that. Okay, you got me. I thought this was just going to be the same old type of situation, and then it sort of wasn't. So I kind of feel like, while it's not by any means reinventing the wheel, and it's not necessarily without its tropes and trends, because it certainly has those within it, I do feel like it utilized them in a way so as to trick you a little bit into thinking that the book was something that, while yes, it contained those things, it also did some other interesting things. I do want to make very clear, though. One, even though I was rooting for Anying to save her family, I found Anying pretty frustrating as a character. She is very stubborn, and she doesn't really always think things through. She's kind of somebody who just goes for things, and you can kind of understand why, given the circumstances that she has grown up within over the course of these last 9 or so years, and she's been forced to sort of be the adult, and so she has all this weight on her shoulders, but she's also, at the end of the day, really young, so I understood why her character was the way she was, but she still really quite often frustrated me, and I wasn't really that invested in the romantic plotline, even though it's a pretty significant part of the story, but I did like the world, I liked the family dynamics, I liked some of the twists and turns that you get throughout the story, and I thought it was just sort of a fun... It was just kind of fun. The way I would describe this, and actually I feel like the author presents it exactly as what it is, because it's dedicated at the beginning. It says this one's for the C-drama girlies. So I think that's perfectly capturing the story. It is very dramatic, and it's very kind of over the top in the drama, and everybody has somewhat heightened emotions, and everybody feels not quite like caricatures, but they do feel like slight exaggerations of a typical character type. And I thought the author utilized those things in a way that ultimately presented a entertaining story. That's at the end of the day what I would say the most about this, is it was entertaining. Whereas something like Engines of War I was talking about before, I feel like there's commentary on people that have power, as I said 1,000 times before. And then also you have the cool stuff, like the cool action scenes and the cool fights and the cool magic. It's got a combination of those things, so it's both entertaining but also allows for moments of reflection, and you can carry a lot of what is within that into our own world and use those things to examine society. So it's got a well-balanced combination, in my opinion anyway, or at least in ways that I really like. Where I think that's true for something like Engines of War, Scorpion and the Night Blossom it feels like it's just fun. For me anyway, I felt like it was just fun. You pick it up when you maybe don't necessarily want to always have to reflect on life and society, and you want something to escape all of that. And I just want to be clear, because I do feel like sometimes people use the concept of escapism in a way so as to diminish the value of it, or to kind of have this, well, it's not really what I want. I want meaning in my stories, but if you just want the fun stuff, then feel free to read it. I think sometimes people present things in that way, and that's not what I mean at all. I think all kinds of stories have their place, and this one was, for me, basically pure fun and entertainment. That said, I'm still on the fence of whether I want to continue on. I did appreciate some of the twists and turns that we got toward the last portion of the story, and I liked the world, and it was a page turner. I flew through this, but I'm not sure just yet. I might pick up the next one, especially if I'm in the mood for something that is fun. If that's something you're looking for, then I think this one will fit the bill pretty well. That's it though for this new fantasy releases wrap up. I will, as stated at the beginning, have links to these in the description bar down below in case you'd like to check them out for yourself. And also, if you wanted to add a little bit more to any of these 3 books, feel free to do so in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.